And public session. Okay, so we've just gone into public session. So item number 5 on the agenda, draft minutes. Can I refer members to draft minutes of proceedings of last week's meeting, page 188 of the meeting pack? Is everybody content? The minutes are a true reflection. Joanne?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of times with regard to dealings with the ministers and information we're getting back, where we say we're waiting, we agreed to deal with it at a later date. I think we should explain why, because it looks like we've just kind of said, "Oh, well, fair enough." I think we need to explain that we're awaiting a response from the Executive Office and the Head of the Civil Service. I think just in terms of transparency, I think it's better if people were reading the minutes that they understand why.
Everybody happy?
Agreed.
Thank you. No, item number 6, matters arising. No matters arising. So, moving to item number 7, Regulation EU 2024-1257, and it's on approval of motor vehicles and engines, components, technical units for such vehicles with regard to their emissions and battery durability. Can I just inform everybody that this item will be recorded by Hansard? Refer members back to the relevant papers, page 8 to 101 of your meeting pack. That can I just advise everybody that an updated explanatory memorandum in relation to the regulation is currently being developed. Can I just inform you that we have Dr. Chris Hughes, Director, Safe and Accessible Travel Division from the Department of Infrastructure, Mrs. Dorcas Cutrona, Head of Vehicle Policy Branch, Department for Infrastructure, and Mr. David Gibson, who's the Vehicle Policy Branch, Department for Infrastructure, who, if you just want to come forward, they're going to brief the committee on the Replacement Act. So I just want to welcome all of you to the meeting. Thank you for your attendance. And
Can I just come in a quick? You made a statement there about sort of the EMs being updated.
Yes.
Have we any idea when that's likely to happen?
Yes.
I presume it's a question we're going to ask.
Open by the 23rd of May.
Okay. So, can I just invite the officials forward as I've done, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, for this opportunity to brief the committee on this matter. So if you are content, I was going to set out some background, give you an update on the information we have managed to gather since the information that we provided previously to the committee, give a brief explanation of what type approval is, and then give an assessment of the impact of the regulation both on manufacturers and consumers, and also provide an update that we received yesterday on the timing of this regulation being brought forward, if you're content. This is about the regulation 2024-1257, which is about type approval of motor vehicles, engine systems, and basically Euro 7, and that's set out for you in the documentation. So if you're content, I'll proceed to give you that update. So we have been in contact, and this update with DFT over the last week, and this information I'm providing reflects the position as the last update that we had, which is of yesterday afternoon. So it's the most recent information that we have available to you. For members' background information, type approval is applied to new vehicles. It's a confirmation that a product which comes off the production line meets the relevant standard that is required at the time. It's a reserved matter, so DFT oversee type approval for Northern Ireland. Specifically, type approval assesses the Euro emission standard that is required for a vehicle at that particular time. And currently that is Euro 6, and this proposal is to move to Euro 7. So Euro 6 has been around since 2015. Euro standards for vehicle emissions have been going since 1992, starting with, as you would expect, Euro 1. They tend to get updated regularly as the technology and as the requirement for what we expect of vehicles to emit into the atmosphere changes. So this is an ongoing process that takes place. Euro 7, when it's brought in, is expected to be applicable for between 5 and 10 years, after which it will be expected to be replaced by Euro 8. There are different types of type approval that you can have now. You can have single vehicle type approval, which applies to GB, or it can apply to EU. or a vehicle can have both types of or both types of vehicle approval, covering both GB and the EU. And DFT encourage manufacturers to apply for both. So that's the brief background to what type approval is. On the impact of the regulation, EU type approval applies to Northern Ireland but not to GB. So if there is a possibility that GB will set less stringent limits than the EU, and so the standards in GB could be lower than they are in the rest of the EU with Euro 7. So we've been engaging with DFT, as I said, and we were updated yesterday. So the latest information we have from DFT, Chair, is that DFT propose to mitigate divergence, the potential divergence, by allowing Euro 7 to be accepted for GB approvals. So they're looking so that if you're approved to Euro 7, that will be accepted within GB. GB wishes to move towards zero emissions at the tailpipe by 2035. So the direction of travel is exactly the same here. This is all moving towards minimising the emission that comes from vehicle. But GB are proposing, and their thinking at this point in time is, rather than do one large set of regulations like the Euro 7 proposes, to move forward on the different aspects of it individually, but towards the same levels of standards. That's the information that we have currently. The impact on manufacturers. Manufacturers, as members will be aware, is a global activity, and manufacturers they have a customer for their vehicles that they manufacture, and they manufacture towards the standard of the target market that the customer has identified. Manufacturers are well used to adapting to whatever standards they are, so they will sell in the Far East, they will sell in the US, Canada, they will sell in Europe, they will sell. So manufacturers are quite adept at adjusting what the standards are. As I said, DFT aim to accept Euro 7 and importantly with no additional testing burden, so that there's no additional testing burden added on manufacturers to be able to sell into the G is what the GB are aiming for. While GB standards may lag behind the EU standards, there is no expectation that they will exceed them. So the Euro 7 will be higher than potentially GB. GB may well match that, but there is no intention at this point that they will exceed them. The impact on consumers. In Northern Ireland, the application of Euro 7 will mean that manufacturers, this applies now, sorry, I should have made clear, this applies to new cars. So existing cars that are on the market are not impacted by this. This is specifically about newly manufactured cars. So manufacturers that are already producing to Euro 7, so as they move towards producing to Euro 7, they will need no additional testing for the Northern Ireland market, because that is what will apply. So what they're doing generally for Europe-wide will, without additional testing, be able to be available in Northern Ireland. So that will protect choice for the Northern Ireland consumer. Therefore, DFT assess that the application of the EU regulation would not have a significant negative impact on everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland. Not applying Euro 7 for the Northern Ireland consumer would mean that new vehicles for Northern Ireland would need to be retested, as Euro 6 would continue to apply. The market in Northern Ireland for that would be tiny, and we would, and as GB is moving towards accepting the Euro 7 standards, so they're saying they want to accept Euro standards, that would potentially leave Northern Ireland as a market looking for Euro 6 and working towards Euro 6 with the potential for additional costs and testing to that. We would also, Euro 7, as members may be aware from the briefing information provided, because it reduces both tailpipe emissions and particulate emissions from braking systems and from the impact of tyres on wheels, particularly for heavier vehicles, which electric vehicles are, they produce more of those. There are specific health benefits that accrue from moving towards the higher standards. So Northern Ireland would also miss out on accruing the health benefits of that. And finally, Chair, I said a quick update on timing, which we received yesterday. So when the proposal was published, manufacturers fed back that they would have difficulty meeting the original timescale, which was to meet these standards by the 1st of July 2025. That proposal has now been put back, so the standard is now expected to be met by the 29th of November 2026. Okay, so
That's across all of Europe.
that's across Europe. Okay.
Right, just
So-
can I ask everybody questions through the chair, please? Go ahead.
That's right.
So, Chair, that was all I had, and so now if we'll take questions if we're able to help.
Thank you. So, I mean, that was very useful. I'm just going to ask you to repeat some of that, given the role that we have. So, in terms of impact here to consumers or the community at large, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that this will have no negative impact.
So that is the assessment that DFT have given.
And by not applying it, there would be a small impact in terms of Euro 7 and Euro 6.
Well, there would be an impact, and it may not be small. So
Right,
it would what it would mean is that potentially cars that are manufactured would need to be shown to meet the Euro 6 standard. And we were having a discussion about this, and perhaps, David, if you could explain the difference between Euro 6 and Euro 7 standards, because you would expect them to be backwards compatible. So you would think that if a car met the Euro 7 standard, it would then automatically meet the Euro 6 standard. That's not the case. So we just asked David to give me an update on that.
Yeah. So Euro 6, that was launched on the 1st of September 2015, and that really affected petrol and diesel cars with a bigger focus on nitrogen oxide produced by diesel vehicles. And it introduced a liquid agent that was injected into the vehicle's exhaust system to make them cleaner. Now, the Euro 7, this will mean that cars they'll take the lowest limits seen in the previous Euro 6 and implement them across all new petrol and diesel vehicles. So there's going to be stricter limits for emissions for all relevant air pollutants already regulated, and there's also going to be new limits for currently unregulated pollutants. There's also going to be a minimum performance requirement for battery durability for electric vehicles and plug-in vehicles. Now, this is really to ensure that sub-standard electric vehicle batteries do not enter the market, as well as to improve consumer awareness and also confidence. And there's also going to be new limits for whole vehicle emission for the brake wear and tear. So that'll really mean that the tyres, there's going to be low emission tyres, brake pads, discs and particulate collectors on new vehicles. So that's really what the Euro 7 is going to introduce.
And also with type approval, new vehicles coming into Northern Ireland have to have a minimum of EU approval, if not dual approval. And new vehicles coming in, the EU type approval will automatically, for manufacturers, they'll be focusing on Euro 7. So if we were to stay with Euro 6, manufacturers would have a very small market in Northern Ireland, because they would have to have EU type approval, but the emissions would have to stay at Euro 6. So it could potentially limit the types of vehicles coming into Northern Ireland. It would make Northern Ireland's market small and potentially unattractive.
And more costly.
Yeah.
So just to confirm that is in relation to not applying the new, it would have a significant impact rather than the minimum. Okay, thank you. Joanne?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much, everybody. That was really helpful for us. I suppose just a couple of things, if I may. So it's welcome, obviously, that the UK as a whole is going to accept Euro 7, and that we're not going to be any different in that regard. But a couple of things. Obviously, the memorandum, the explanatory memorandum, is still being done up. But I noted in the papers that there was significant opposition on the grounds of cost and impact from car makers, and there are issues, I suppose, with the automotive industries kind of pushing back on this, and particularly some countries. In fact, Italy was mentioned. So I suppose, where is the EU in terms of where we are being the final picture? You know, are things likely to change because of pushback from manufacturers, and because some of the countries aren't happy either, the countries where manufacturers are based? You know, are things likely to change from what you've got now?
So our understanding is that on the cost issue, so the cost issue was raised, and the cost is currently expected to be approximately £250 per car, for the moving to these standards, and about £2,000 for a lorry or a HGV or a larger vehicle, and that will be borne by the manufacturer and therefore can be expected to be passed on to the consumer. It is a more rigorous testing standard. The EU assessment, we understand, is that they have looked at the wider health benefits of this. So while the cost of implementing it will be approximately 40 billion. The health benefits that they expect to accrue are 160 billion. So there is seen as being a net benefit through health, but a cost to the industry. And the industry, whenever they were raising their concerns about the implementation of the regulation, was to do with the availability of being able to manufacture to the standards rather than the cost of those. That was the reason that we understand as to why the delay was brought in.
Not much I'm clear about. The issue is more because of the opposition coming from certain countries and the car manufacturers themselves.
Yeah.
Is what we have now likely to be the end result, or is it likely to change? Is what I'm asking.
No, it's been adopted by the European Commission. So
okay, so we're good now. This what we've got is what we've got.
Yeah, and a lot of the manufacturers' concerns were about their technology and being able to meet the 1st of July 2025 deadline, and that has been extended now to November 2026.
Heard that too. But so are they content with that?
Yes, it has been. It was adopted. Sorry, I've got the actual date of that. It came into force on it will come into force on the 28th of May. This month.
Right, and what is the likelihood of? Appreciate now we're going. It's fine with UK accepting it anyway, but if GB accepts this in a piecemeal fashion as opposed to en bloc, what's the impact going to be in Northern Ireland?
So they are intending on accepting Euro 7 en bloc. So they'll accept that en bloc, but what they will do is they will move their own regulation on a more piecemeal to get to that standard. So the impact on if a car meets Euro 7, it's good to go in GB market and it's good to go in the Northern Ireland market. It's just the GB standard will move more slowly towards that.
So there's no concern in that regard then.
They as of yesterday, they've said that this is word from DFT, we aim to introduce a number of individual measures rather than a whole package, as the EU has chosen to do so with Euro 7.
The Euro 7 will be accepted.
The likelihood is the manufacturers will manufacture to that standard, and then it'll be adopted in GB at whatever stage. I suppose finally, Chair, just if I may, MOTs, what's the impact going to be on MOTs?
In advance of this meeting, I actually contacted DVA, and for them it's just really business as usual. There will be potentially higher standards of emissions to be tested for, but it's not from a work perspective. It is just business as usual. They'll just take that in their stride. They'll have the equipment to test at that level. And
so with the delayed date for the implementation of it, so the Northern Ireland MOT regime kicks in at 4 years, so that will mean then it will be 2030 before the first cars tested to this standard will be rolling into the MOT test centres. So they will, as business as usual, they will be aware that this will come in. As they do their equipment refreshes, they will be able to take account of that in their developments. So
ultimately then, the primary impact is going to be an increase in cost, because that's going to be passed on to the consumer from the manufacturers, but that is essentially going to be continent-wide. Thank you.
David, sorry.
Thanks very much, Chair. Could I ask, you were speaking in the presentation about, and to Joanne there, that the UK is going to accept Euro 7 en bloc, but you also commented that the GB may decide to introduce lower standards, but wouldn't go higher, essentially. So how does that line up if they're going to accept it, but they're leaving themselves wriggle room in terms of they may go lower?
I think from the feedback we have from them, they're unlikely to go lower, but they're not just they're going to do it in a sort of like a staggered kind of approach. But they're Euro 6 at the moment, and they are, from what they have informed us, they are working towards Euro 7 standards. But it's going to be staggered approach rather than a just block buying into Euro 7.
And EFT have. I'm trying to think what we'll come to now. That you said that some of the are that you have with a lot of the major manufacturers will adopt Euro 7 through choice in the dual regulation and so on anyway. But DFT are encouraging people to go for that sort of dual standard. Is there known manufacturers out there who refuse it or who will not do that? And what significance are that we're aware of?
I have asked similar questions of DFT, and they said there has been limited kind of feedback from manufacturers. Some manufacturers may not opt to go for, I mean, DFT are encouraging manufacturers to go for dual type approval. Some manufacturers may choose not to do that. However, most vehicles will have a customer, and the manufacturers will know where that customer is based, so they will type approve to wherever their customer is based. So even
and I understand the idea that if you're trying to sell to as big a market as possible, you're going to go for the highest level of regulation. It's just trying to understand there might be manufacturers that only serve UK or how that works. And in terms of if those manufacturers did exist, I guess the impact upon Northern Ireland would be that what they produce would not be available to consumers in Northern Ireland. Would that be right? You know, we bring this in, those manufacturers within the UK or GB don't manufacture to those standards, then their product would not be able to enter the UK, is that, or enter Northern Ireland, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But also then for manufacturers, there's a very limited number of manufacturers in Northern Ireland, but Northern Ireland manufacturers, thinking of, you know, like the likes of Wrightbus and whatever,
yes.
they decide which, you know, what market they're selling to, so they would have the choice then to type approval, whether it's GB approval or EU approval or dual.
Steve?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, may I congratulate you on your evidence session. We haven't necessarily had from other departments the same amount of approach to it and the rest of it, and you are to be commended for that. And thank you very much indeed. The question I have is really about, and it sort of builds on the other two questions. Is it my understanding, therefore, that on the 29th of 11/26, if a vehicle doesn't meet the Euro 7 standards, it can't be imported into Northern Ireland?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as a new
Yeah.
car, yeah.
Yeah.
So there will be a ban on non-sort of Euro 7 vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay. Have we had any discussions with the car dealerships about sort of any implications about this or any of these issues here?
We like DFI haven't, because type approval is it's DFT reserved matter, so we haven't had any direct engagement with local kind of vehicle dealerships. I think DFT may have, but again, I'm not sure of how, you know, the level of that. But, you know, I have asked DFT for if there has been any feedback around the type approval kind of registration process, you know, to let us know the kind of feedback that comes from manufacturers, and to date they haven't come back with
And do we
anything.
know if DFT has indicated that there's any UK manufacturers are not going to manufacture to Euro 7? Because it would
Yeah,
be...
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I am aware of one manufacturer based in Sunderland who is just going to focus on GB type approval, so that in itself would potentially lend itself that it wouldn't necessarily at this point in time go to the Euro 7 standard.
You tell me not to buy a Nissan then?
Well, you could buy a Nissan from Europe.
Thank you. That's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Good job. Owen?
Thank you, Chair. So just for clarity, this applies to new vehicles rather than used vehicles, so there'd be no issue around import of used from GB, for example. Okay. And just building upon, I think it was Joanne's questions, we've talked a bit about the impact on the automobile industry, sort of more broadly across Europe, and our primary concern, I guess, for our purposes is the impact on the community here in Northern Ireland. So if we think about the community and their interaction with vehicles, you have point of purchase, and I think you've said there may be a cost implication, but irrespective of whether Northern Ireland adopts the regulation, manufacturers are likely to comply with Euro 7 anyway, so we'd be inconsequential in that. Joanne's dealt with MOTs. The other area where I think in day-to-day life people would have potential interaction with this is around vehicle repairs. Article 4, I think, deals with aftermarket replacement parts. Is it fair to say that that's likely to have a small but positive impact on consumers here?
The improvement of the standards and the longevity of the batteries is likely to improve consumer confidence, particularly in the secondary market, in the used electric vehicle. I'm not sure about maintenance. I don't know, Dorcas, if you need any information on that. Sorry.
No, that's no problem. I think there's some provision just around, for example, encouraging competition and preventing a situation where people have to go to the manufacturer for certain parts. So my understanding of that would be positive generally for competition.
Well, certainly more competition would be positive for consumers. I don't know how it applies to this, to be honest.
That's no problem at all. And just the final part then of the sort of life cycle, if you like, is whenever someone goes to sell their car, and the only potential sort of issue would maybe be around divergence with GB, and you're saying we're not expecting any issues in that regard either?
This is just purely for new vehicles.
Okay, so there'd be no impact for somebody selling their car? No. That's me, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. So, thank you. Under paragraph 8.1 of Schedule 6B to the NI Act 1988, the committee must decide today whether or not to hold an inquiry into the published replacement EU Act that has been notified. Should the committee fail to decide, the failure will be treated as a decision not to hold an inquiry. So, having regard to the legal advice on whether it appears likely that the replacement EU Act significantly differs in whole or part from the content or scope of the EU instrument which it replaces, and the departmental initial assessment on whether it appears likely that the replacement Act would have a significant impact specific to everyday life for communities here in a way is liable to persist, do members wish to hold an inquiry into Regulation EU 2024-1257 on type approval of motor vehicles and engines and of systems, components, separate technical units intended for such vehicles with respect to their emissions and battery durability? David.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't accepted and listened to what was said in the presentation there. I still would like some reassurance around the phased approach of the UK government and that it's and the impact it would have on either consumers or some of our manufacturers here. I'm minded to agree with what was said in the presentation, but I would be minded to also to propose the inquiry on the basis of having the ability to reach out to and hear from manufacturers if they wish to come forward.
Owen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to propose that we don't proceed to an inquiry on this occasion, having regard to the evidence that we've just received. There is, I think, a concern that's been explored around manufacturers, but our focus is about the impact on day-to-day life of communities in Northern Ireland, and I think the evidence that we've received has been very clear that given the nature of the automobile industry, actually us adopting or not adopting this will be largely inconsequential in terms of the standards that the automobile industry adhere to. I also believe the evidence has been clear that not applying this particular act would have a bigger impact on communities here than applying it. And so, based on the evidence that we've received, I don't believe there's a need for an inquiry on this particular occasion.
Steve?
Yeah, just a very quick one. I'm minded. I think the evidence today was particularly good, and I do say that it was good to see actually a department giving some a particularly fulsome set of, and I think that's the standard we should be expecting from other departments. That said, I would like to hear from the car dealerships and because we have to look at the impact of people in Northern Ireland, it might be a very short inquiry. It might be they might just turn around and say, actually, there isn't an issue. That would be absolutely fine by me.
Yeah,
I just have this. I'd just like to get the get to that point where the car dealership says it's not going to be a significant issue. It's not going to be a significant cost. I think we can move on very quickly at that point. So a limited inquiry, particularly around just that particular issue, is something I would probably like to see.
More or less.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, David's made a proposal. I think we should take a vote on it.
Could I just, Chair, before we do, could I just I take on board Owen's point, because to be honest, I was reassured at what I heard today that GB's going to accept with very little divergence. In theory, not much of an impact. The only thing I would quite like to tease out is just this phased approach business, and whether or not in the interim periods it could cause us some issues. And it would give us a chance also to see the updated EM.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't think we need to do a full, all singing, all dancing, but could we just tease out those couple of issues? Would the member be agreeable to that?
Sure, I would just say, if I may, we have a set procedure in terms of what we should have consideration to, and it is based on whether we believe there will be a significant impact based on the initial assessment that we're given. And I think there will be issues coming down the track which I think will require time and resource of this committee for scrutiny, and on this occasion I'm just not convinced of the value that we could add. There may be informal, and I'm sure we'll all do it, we'll all have informal engagement with dealerships and with government to get that reassurance, but I'm not sure, Chair, to be honest, what value this committee could have in that process, given the evidence that we've had that actually in all likelihood this is going to have to apply, because not applying it would have a greater impact on our constituents than not doing it, or than applying it.
Declan?
Yeah, I said 2 weeks ago, Philip, that and I thought there was a broad consensus for this observation, that while we have a responsibility to fully discharge our role in maximising scrutiny of everything that comes before the committee, that has to be done in a proportionate way. We need to avoid going down rabbit holes, conducting inquiries on matters that in fact do not warrant, according to the advice that we've received either legally or departmentally, an actual inquiry. So I share the point which has been made that this is not something which merits an inquiry, but perhaps the clerk and yourself could advise us on this particular point, and hopefully I'm not creating a diversion in raising this matter. While I agree and support that there is no merit for inquiry here, is it possible to, or should we seek correspondence from the relevant manufacturers to verify or copper fasten what we have been told, but that in itself does not constitute an inquiry? I don't think I don't think that you can have a bit of an inquiry. I think that you either have an inquiry or no inquiry. But does seeking additional information run in conflict with the decision not to seek the inquiry but to share with members additional information that in fact we're on the right side of discharging the functions of the committee?
We will get an updated EM which will have been updated on the back of consultation with the car manufacturer. So I mean, at some stage we will provide that, or we will get that information.
So that does enable additional information to be brought forward without us having to then entangle ourselves in the requirement for an inquiry. There are going to be inquiries in the future, and I will absolutely and fully support the need to carry out those inquiries, but let's do this in a proportionate and a sensible way rather than running down rabbit holes at every wheel and turn. Yes. Sorry for mixing my metaphors in relation to decisions around inquiries.
Okay, so I'm conscious everybody that's indicated has got to speak. I think we should just move to the proposal from David is that we have an inquiry, so I'm just going to ask for a vote on that. Are those in favour?
See, this is why I suppose it might be helpful to speak again. The only issues we wanted to tease, well, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's David's proposal, but as far as I was concerned, I'm happy enough to tease out that issue. I'd be also happy to write to the Cabinet Office on the phased approach, which means we wouldn't have to conduct an inquiry.
We have a decision to make. It's whether we have an inquiry or not. That's the proposal. That's what I'm asking for a vote on. You know, we don't have 50% of an inquiry, we don't have 30% of an inquiry. We have an inquiry or not, and that's the proposal. So, I mean, we could talk for 10 minutes. We're going to get to a point of a vote. I'm moving to that point now. Yeah. So, those in favour of David's proposal for an inquiry, could they please raise their hand?
Jonathan. Okay.
Those opposed?
Aye.
What happens in that case?
The votes are equal, so the proposal falls, so there will be no inquiry. Can I just clarify then just the actions that the updated EM obviously is circulated to members and will be published on the website, and in terms of writing to the manufacturers, that was also agreed. Am I? Yep.
Dealership, car dealers from Northern Ireland, just with costs. I think through the chair. Sorry, apologies. That was my concern about how much is this going to cost the consumer in Northern Ireland, and they haven't engaged with whatever the car dealership network is in Northern Ireland or whatever. So I don't know what they're called, but
Right, if you want, write to the UK department, because they, as far as the officials were, they were engaging with car dealerships, so we could write to ask for those costs if they're not included in the updated EM, and write to manufacturers here.
And just for members, I mean, members of this committee will be aware of this anyway, but I'm just going to repeat it. Whether we have an inquiry or not doesn't limit 30 members deciding to pull the brake. But to pull the brake, you need to meet the two criteria, which is the legal opinion on whether something is materially different or the impact. So, for us to do an inquiry, it's helpful or not helpful, but it doesn't preclude 30 members if the thing meets the criteria and moving forward.
And just to say, Chair, I do understand the frustrations of the committee, and that the parameters in which we operate are frustrating at times, and another option would be helpful perhaps at times, but it is just that sometimes that you want, while hearing different opinions, you want to hear from some of those who may be impacted, and sometimes it feels like an inquiry is the only way in which we can do that. So I understand the frustrations, and I understand the point that you did make, Declan, a couple of weeks ago, but I guess my proposal is down to feeling that is the option that is open to me to propose, and there we are.
Okay, we're just going to move on now to number 8.
Chairman, just if I may, if we're writing to the manufacturers, can we all write to the Cabinet Office and establish a bit more information about the phased approach, what the implications for Northern Ireland might be?
Okay.
Thank you.
Item number 8, Regulation EU 2024-1252, establishing a framework for ensuring a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. Can I refer members to the relevant papers at page 103-185 of the pack? Remind that in line with agreed committee procedures, initial departmental assessment of impact was requested on the Replacement EU Act via the Executive Office. The Executive Office has advised that this notification relates to a piece of legislation which is reserved and is of limited technical interest to departments here. The Executive Office contacted the British Department for Business and Trade, who agreed to provide information subject to clearances. The Department for Business and Trade stated that the deadline for responding to this committee is very challenging and the response may be late, so no information has been provided or received as yet. The British Government did not deposit the proposed regulation in Westminster for scrutiny by the Commons or the Lords EU Scrutiny Committees. So that would suggest that at the time it didn't consider this regulation would apply here. As a result, there is no explanatory memorandum setting out any anticipated legal or policy implications under the Windsor framework. Under paragraph 8.1 of the Schedule 6B to the NI Act 1988, the committee must decide today whether or not to hold an inquiry into the published Replacement EU Act that has been notified. Should the committee fail to do so, the failure will be treated as a decision not to hold an inquiry. In making its decision, the committee must have regard to whether the Act differs in content and scope from the old regulation and the impact to everyday life and communities here. In the absence of a departmental assessment and an explanatory memorandum from the British Government, the committee does not have the official information on impact, so the consideration should be based on our own assessment of impact. So, having had regard to the legal advice on whether it appears likely that the Replacement EU Act significantly differs in whole or in part from the content of scope of the EU instrument which it replaces, and the committee's assessment of whether it appears likely that the Replacement Act would have a significant impact to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist. Do members wish to hold an inquiry into Regulation EU 2024-1252, establishing a framework for ensuring a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials?
Yes.
Steve.
Sir, Chair, this is very unsatisfactory that we don't have any information to do this. And my concern is that we're being asked to make a decision on something we have no information for. And I think, as I've said before, about the idea of the precautionary principle, and I hear what Owen says, and we can't be having an inquiry about everything, but we do at least need to understand if there is any impact on this, because we've had advice, we've had this, but we don't have any explanatory notes, we don't have any details. And look, I would feel very uncomfortable about waving this through without at least having gone through the process of asking to do an inquiry. And I know it's going to be particularly difficult, and I understand the frustrations, and I feel frustrated about this, but I don't have the information to make the decision about, and I've got to at least have something that I can be able to say one way or another. And I think that's up to all of us as members of this committee, that we do need to keep to this precautionary principle, even though it probably, it may not mean anything, but I think that's what we must do. So I would propose that we would have an inquiry on this, on the basis that we don't have the information to go forward, so we've got to have an inquiry to understand it.
David?
Yeah, and sure, just say I understand what you're saying, that you either have an inquiry or you don't have an inquiry, but I also agree with Steve in this, in that in terms of the resource and time and effort given to it, I think in terms of the submissions that are made and so on, we can see the way a picture comes as to whether this is something we need to put huge amount of resource or time into, or whether it's just giving people an opportunity to respond. But I would agree largely with what Steve said and support the proposal for inquiry.
Okay, can I ask the question? Do members wish to hold an inquiry into Regulation EU 2024-1252, establishing a framework for ensuring a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials?
Great.
Okay. Committee's decision in relation to the Act will be published on its webpage. So, can I ask members to consider and agree the inquiry timeline, which is at page 182, which includes an oral evidence session with departmental officials on 23rd of May. This is probably not feasible now, given the update received from the Executive Office, but if people are happy, the Secretariat can discuss this with officials. Seek agreement just from everybody to ask for views on the Act via citizen space survey from key representatives, businesses and civil society, identified by Ray's at page 183 of the meeting pack. Okay, can I advise members that citizen space survey will be promoted on social media platforms and anyone out there will be able to respond. So, also in line with agreed processes, views on the EU Act and its impact on communities here and details of the position England, Scotland and Wales will be requested from the British Government. Okay, moving on to item number 9, Regulation EU 2024-1157 on shipments of waste. Can I inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard? Can I refer members to the relevant papers at page 199 to 380 of the meeting pack? Members at last week's meeting, the committee agreed to hold an inquiry into the Replacement EU Act, and officials were invited to give oral evidence today as part of the inquiry and hopefully address some of the issues that were raised at last week's meeting. So, if I could just welcome Shane Doris, Director of Environmental Policy Division, DAERA, Stephen Leckie, Principal Scientific Officer of DAERA, and Philip McMurray, Environmental Policy Division. So, I think two of us were here last week.
Yes,
So, Phil Sharash, welcome back. And I just want to allow you to present in front of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the introductions. As you mentioned, joined again by Stephen on this time, accompanied by Philip, Principal in Waste and Single-Use Plastics branch within Environmental Resources Policy Division. Also, as you noticed in your introduction, we're here to discuss the published Replacement Act Regulation EU 2024-1157 on shipments of waste. And I'm grateful to the committee for their time allowing us to present our initial assessment last week, acknowledge the request for further inquiry on the regulation. May be pleased to hear I don't intend to repeat the briefing from last week, but I will summarise some of the key points just before we address some of the queries. The summary of the Act itself, it establishes procedures and control regimes for shipments of waste, depending on the origin, destination and route of the shipment, the type of waste and the type of treatment to be applied to the waste at its destination. The regulation applies to shipments of waste between member states, with or without transit through third countries, shipments of waste imported into the EU from third countries, shipments of waste exported from the EU to third countries, and shipments of waste in transit through the EU on their way to or from third countries, with the aim of the replacement regulation to prohibit the export of plastic waste to non-OECD countries. Other waste suitable for recycling will be exported from the EU to non-OECD countries only when they ensure that they can deal with it in a sustainable manner. It also implements an EU digital tracking system for waste shipments. And obviously, as set out, the department responsible defer the lead department on international waste shipment, as this is a reserved policy matter. However, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency is the named competent authority of enforcement for destination and dispatch. And the previous points to note, as this is a replacement regulation, much of the content of the regulation already exists and applies, and part of the update also reflects updates to the UN Basel Convention on transboundary shipments of waste. The UK is party to this convention and will have to adhere to the rules on international shipments of waste. And separately, a new UK-wide digital tracking system is being developed to tackle waste trafficking and enhance the development of a circular economy for waste. It is expected that the UK system will be compatible with the new EU digital requirements. I had previously advised that UKG officials were working to update the current explanatory memorandum, which is from proposal stage. That work is still ongoing, and an updated EM will be forwarded to the committee when available. I also thank the committee for providing the follow-up questions from last week, requesting further information on 1, the breakdown of the type of waste which makes up the 1 million tonnes exported from Northern Ireland annually, 2, classifications of waste and any change to this upon implementation of the Act, and 3, a breakdown of the potential costs to local authorities as a result of the changes. If you're content, we will address these now, pausing after each of the questions to address in turn any further comments or queries you may have. And apologies, we had hoped to get these to the committee in advance of today, and certainly we can follow these up in writing afterwards in the detail that's required. I'll hand over to Stephen to address question 1, seeking a breakdown of the type of waste which makes up the 1 million tonnes exported from Northern Ireland annually.
Okay. In 2023 then, you're aware that we exported just under 1 million tonnes of waste, and waste is exported under the EU regulations on waste shipments and consists of 2 main types. So there's notifiable waste and greenless waste. Notifiable waste generally consists of its refuse-derived fuel, or RDF, mixed waste and hazardous waste. Greenless waste generally consists of single-stream waste, and that's the likes of metal, paper, plastics. Notifiable waste exports in 2023 totaled approximately 300,000 tonnes, and over 90% of that was RDF for R1 operations, which is use as a fuel to generate energy. These included exports to Sweden, Norway and Denmark, among other countries. The next largest was waste oils at 2% for R9 recovery, which is used for oil re-refining. There were no notifiable waste exports to non-OECD countries, and associated export fees totaled approximately £78,000. The fees and refunds associated with the notifiable waste movements, they're not determined by the new EU regulations. NIA has a specific policy that details the necessary fees for notifiable waste movements, and this policy is scheduled for review by NIA and has not been updated since 2014. And as mentioned last week, the other UK regulators are currently doing some work on their fees and refunds policy, but we have not started this piece of work yet. Then, as mentioned, the other type of waste is greenless waste that we export, and in 2023 that totaled approximately 700,000 tonnes. Metal accounted for around 50% of exports, then there was paper about 30%, and plastic, and then tyres. Greenless exports can be broken down further into going to OECD and non-OECD countries. In 2023, NIA exported approximately 500,000 tonnes of greenless waste to 16 OECD countries and approximately 200,000 tonnes of waste to 8 non-OECD countries. The majority of the exports to non-OECD countries consisted of metal, paper and tyre waste, and there was only 300 tonnes, which equals about 10 to 12 shipments of plastic waste, and that was exported to 2 non-OECD countries consisting of Malaysia and India. And currently these are all that would be affected by the introduction on the ban on plastic to non-OECD countries, and there are other outlets within the EU and OECD member countries for plastic waste. So we therefore don't believe the ban on plastic exports to non-OECD countries will have a significant impact on NI stakeholders, and there are currently no fees associated with the movements of greenless waste. And that's the breakdown of the first question there. So if there's any questions then please.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions on that particular issue? David?
Will the shift from also there'll be other considerations, but will the shift from using like some Malaysia and India to other countries within the EU, for instance, mean a considerable rise in cost?
It's not something that we are aware of, but because there are other outlets, you know, there currently is waste plastic going to within Europe and OECD, so we don't believe there'll be a significant issue with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, just want to go on to the next one.
Yes, thanks for the follow-up questions on that, and again I'll pass to Stephen just to run through question 2.
Okay, question 2 then was the classifications of waste and any change to this upon implementation of the Act. So the Basel Convention has added 2 new e-waste codes to Annex 2 and Annex 8 of the Convention. The new Annex 2 code is for non-hazardous e-waste, and that code is Y49, and the new Annex 8 code is for hazardous e-waste, and that's A1181. In the new EU 2024-1157 regulations, Annex 2 and Annex 8 are referred to in relation to being prohibited from export to non-OECD countries. That's in paragraph 44 and Article 39 of the new regulations. So this would effectively result in a ban of any e-waste from EU, that's including Northern Ireland, to non-OECD countries. And in 2023, we only exported 1 load at 27 tonnes of non-hazardous e-waste to Pakistan. So again, we don't believe there will be a significant impact in relation to this type of waste for NI stakeholders.
Okay, any questions here? No, thank you. I just want to take the third one.
Yeah, I'll come in on the third one, the breakdown of potential costs for local authorities. Within the new regulation on waste shipments, there is an EU requirement for a digital waste tracking system, but there are no direct fees detailed within those regulations. As mentioned in the introduction, the UK are independently developing their own waste tracking system that will eventually feed into the EU system. Fees and charges associated with the UK digital waste tracking system are yet to be determined, with work ongoing by the team involved in that process. For digital waste tracking, a separate NIE specific policy would have to be introduced once any fees and charges have been agreed, but this will be outside the scope of this regulation on waste shipments. Notifiable waste charges need to be reviewed, but they are separate to the new 2024-1157 regulation, so fees will remain unchanged. that's sort of as much detail as we have at this point. As we mentioned, the digital waste tracking, the fees aren't determined as yet, but we don't expect those to be significant.
Okay. Any questions? No. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, can I just inform members that committee citizen space survey was launched and will close on the 20th of May, and the committee will consider the survey response at next week's meeting, and will consider a draft response at the meeting on 30th of May. Okay, number 10, EU regulation 2024-1143, geographical indications for wine, spirits, drinks and agricultural products, consideration of survey responses. So can I refer members to relevant pages 381 to 467 of the meeting pack. Remind you that applications for GI schemes are reserved matter and the responsibility of the British Government, Department of Environment, or DEFRA. There is an updated explanatory memorandum received yesterday from the Cabinet Office. That's at page 14 to 26 of the table of papers. Are members happy to consider the EM in advance of next week's meeting when a draft report will be considered? Okay. Refer members to the Citizen Space Survey responses, page 27 of the table pack. So there are 4 responses which have been received. In summary, all are of the view that applying the EU Act would have a positive impact, whilst not applying the Act would have a negative impact. So the content of the explanatory memorandum and the Citizen Space responses will be reflected in the draft report for consideration at next week's meeting, and the final report will be agreed at the meeting on 30th of May. Anybody any comments? No? Everyone's sassed it. Correspondence. Copy of a letter from the Minister of Biosecurity, Animal Health, Welfare to the House of Lords Subcommittee on the Windsor Framework is at page 469 of the meeting pack, and this is regarding rules for non-commercial movements of pet birds to into a member state from a territory or a third country. So, in line with the committee's agreed protocol, our members consent to forward the correspondence to the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs.
Yes.
Happy?
Yeah.
Okay. Chair's business, item number 12. So, an updated table on relevant proposed acts in the EU legislative system has been received from the Executive Office, and this will be circulated to members following the meeting. Committee's priority is obviously to carry out our statutory functions within very tight time frames. Therefore, with the agreement of the committee, hopefully the table will be included on the agenda for consideration at a later date when the committee has a bit more free time and capacity. Okay. Any other business? Steve?
Just to record my apologies for next week.
Yep, thank you. And safe travels. Item number 14, date, time, place of next meeting. Can I just inform members that next meeting is next Thursday, 23rd of May 2024 at 10 AM, room 30. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Committee Room 30, sound.